I'm Florence, 28 female. I live in a city that glitters from a distance but feels like a cage up close, especially when that cage is gilded with my family's expectations. For years, I've been the quiet disappointment, the one who traded a prestigious law track for a silly computer hobby. My family saw my simple apartment, my second-hand car, and my refusal to accept their money as proof of my failure, a disgrace to the Hayes family name. They had no idea that my silly hobby had grown into 3 successful, completely anonymous tech companies, or that the broke disgrace they mocked was financially propping up their entire lavish lifestyle without them even knowing it. This is the story of how their relentless mockery at my birthday dinner became the final push I needed to pull the plug, pack my bags, and let their carefully constructed world come crashing down around them. Before this story unfolds, I'd love to connect with you. Please let me know in the comments where you're watching from and what time it is in your corner of the world. It's amazing to see how far these stories can travel. The restaurant was the kind my mother, Margaret, adored, obscenely expensive, suffocatingly formal, and filled with people who measured worth by the brand of a watch. It was my 28th birthday dinner, but like most Hayes family gatherings, it wasn't about me. It was about performance. My brother, Leo, was holding court, loudly recounting a recent genius stock market move. He was the family's financial advisor, a title he'd been given along with a corner office in a building my father had owned. At 30, Leo had the unearned confidence of a man who had never faced a single consequence. My sister, Isabel, sat opposite me, scrolling through her phone with a bored expression. At 25, she was a wedding planner for the city's elite, a job that mostly involved leveraging our family name to secure contracts. She sighed dramatically, setting her phone down. "Florence, darling, are you really wearing that? It's quaint." I glanced down at my simple, dark blue dress. It was elegant and comfortable. "I like it, Izzy." "It just screams budget," she said, not unkindly, but with the casual cruelty of someone who had never had to check a price tag. "You have a birthday coming up. I could take you shopping. We could find you something that doesn't look like it came from a well, you know." My mother chimed in, her voice smooth as silk. "Isabel is just concerned for your image, dear. We all are. A Hayes shouldn't look like they're struggling." Struggling? That was the word they'd settled on to define me. Because I didn't broadcast my life on social media like Isabel or brag about financial conquests like Leo, I was the odd one out, the failure, the project. For years, I'd let them believe it. It was easier. It kept my real life, my companies, my employees, my success, safe from their meddling and judgment. I had built my empire in the shadows, creating apps and software solutions under pseudonyms and shell corporations. My flagship company, Innovate, was a leader in logistics software, but no one knew that the quiet girl in the corner of the family portrait was its founder and CEO. The irony was a constant, bitter taste in my mouth. The money Leo was investing, and the funds for Isabel's extravagant lifestyle were being funneled from a trust that I was secretly replenishing every month. "Speaking of finances," Leo said, turning his condescending gaze to me, "I was reviewing the family portfolio. Things are tight, the market's volatile." He leaned back, steepling his fingers. "Florence, Mom and I were talking. Maybe it's time you considered a real career. That little computer thing you do is fine as a hobby, but you're 28 now. It's time to be an adult." The little computer thing had just secured a 7-figure contract with a shipping conglomerate in Asia. My net worth had surpassed my family's entire fortune 2 years ago. I kept my face neutral. "I'm happy with what I do, Leo." "Happy doesn't pay the bills," he scoffed. "Look, I have a friend who manages a call center. It's not glamorous, but it's a steady paycheck. I could make a call." The offer hung in the air, thick with pity. A call center. He was offering me a job in a call center. I felt a familiar hot flush of anger, but I pushed it down. For years, my best friend Clara had been telling me to come clean. "Just show them your bank statement," she'd say. Watch their jaws hit the floor. But it was never about the money. It was about respect. I wanted them to value me, not my wallet. And every year, they proved they were incapable of it. My mother reached across the table and patted my hand. Her touch was cold. He's just trying to help, Florence. We're worried. We give you so much, and we just want to see you stand on your own 2 feet. That was the line that broke me. Give me so much? I asked, my voice dangerously quiet. Of course, dear, she sighed. Oblivious. The trust fund your father left for you children, Leo manages it so well to make sure you have a safety net. A safety net? The trust had been nearly empty for 5 years, drained by Leo's bad investments and Isabel's shopping sprees. I was the one who had secretly poured millions back into it to keep them afloat, to protect the family legacy I thought they cared about. They weren't giving me a safety net, they were living on one I had woven for them. Leo must have sensed a shift in the mood. He decided to deliver the final blow. We've been too soft on you, he declared, his voice taking on a tone of authority. We've decided it's time for some tough love. We're cutting you off from the trust. It's for your own good. You're on your own now, Florence. It's time to sink or swim. Isabel smirked into her wine glass. My mother nodded in solemn agreement. They looked at me, expecting tears, pleading, or maybe even gratitude for their lesson. They saw me as a charity case, a broke disgrace they were finally pushing out of the nest. I looked at each of them, my arrogant brother, my vapid sister, my clueless mother. The anger I had suppressed for years didn't explode. It crystallized into something cold, hard, and clear. They didn't know me at all, and they didn't deserve to. I placed my napkin on the table, the linen crisp and white against the dark wood. I stood up. I didn't say a word. I didn't yell or cry. I simply looked each of them in the eye, holding their gaze for a moment, letting the silence stretch. Then I turned around and walked out of the restaurant, leaving them sitting there with their mouths half open, stunned by my lack of a reaction. As the cool night air hit my face, I felt a profound sense of relief. They thought they had pushed me out. They had no idea they had just set me free, and I was about to let them sink. The walk home from the restaurant was about 20 blocks, but I welcomed the cold night air and the rhythmic click of my heels on the pavement. My mind was a whirlwind, replaying the scene at the dinner table. Leo's pompous declaration, "You're on your own now," echoed in my ears, not as a threat, but as a long-overdue release. For years, I had been living a double life, carefully partitioning my world to protect my family from the truth, and I now realized to protect myself from their greed. The trust fund was the centerpiece of their delusion. Set up by my late father, it was meant to be an equal inheritance for the 3 of us, a legacy of his hard work in building a small but respected financial firm. After he passed, Leo, fresh out of business school with more ego than sense, had convinced my mother he should be the sole manager of the fund. It was the family's golden goose, the source of their social standing, their lavish vacations, and Isabel's ever-expanding wardrobe. They spoke of it in reverent tones, a bottomless well of security. They had no idea the well had run dry years ago. I first found out by accident. It was about 5 years back. I was developing a sophisticated financial tracking software for a client and decided to run a diagnostic on my own accounts as a test. On a whim, I linked the trust account, to which I still had monitoring access. The numbers that came back were horrifying. The balance was less than 10% of what it should have been. Millions were gone. Panicked, I hired a discreet forensic accountant who confirmed my fears. Leo wasn't an investment genius. He was a gambler. He'd lost a fortune on high-risk, speculative stocks and covered his tracks with creative accounting. What little remained was being siphoned off by Isabel at an alarming rate for her business expenses, which included designer bags and first-class flights to fashion weeks. At the time, my first instinct was to save them, to save the family name. My own company was just becoming profitable, and I made a decision that I now saw as my greatest mistake. Instead of confronting them, I started quietly transferring funds. Every month, a significant portion of my earnings went from one of my anonymous corporate accounts into the trust. I coded the transfers to look like returns on a non-existent international investment Leo had supposedly made, a move that only inflated his ego further. He'd even bragged about his mystery European stock at family dinners, completely unaware that he was bragging about my hard work. I was their silent benefactor, the secret source of the very wealth they used to look down on me. When I got back to my apartment, a modest two-bedroom that my family called cramped, I didn't turn on the lights. I stood in the darkness, looking out at the city skyline. This place was my sanctuary. It was filled not with expensive art like my mother's home, but with whiteboards covered in code, servers humming quietly in a spare room, and books on programming and business strategy. This was the real me, the person they refused to see. I thought about the conversation with my best friend, Clara, just last week. We were sitting in her cozy, cluttered apartment, a world away from the sterile perfection of my family's mansion. "Flo, you're a multimillionaire living like a grad student to prop up 3 people who treat you like dirt," she'd said, shaking her head. "It's not protecting them, it's enabling them. What happens when you stop?" "The entire house of cards falls," I had answered quietly. "Maybe it needs to," she had replied, her gaze steady and serious. Now her words felt like a prophecy. They had made the decision for me. They had cut me off from the money I was supplying. The irony was so thick I could taste it. I walked over to my desk and powered on my main computer. The glow of the monitors illuminated my face. With a few clicks, I pulled up the dashboard for the trust fund. Leo's latest withdrawal from that afternoon was for a down payment on a new sports car. Isabel had spent $20,000 at a designer boutique 2 days earlier. My latest deposit, made just last week, had covered both. They were children with a credit card they didn't know had a secret benefactor. My finger hovered over the keyboard. For 5 years, I had maintained this charade. I told myself it was to honor my father's memory, to keep the family from imploding. But sitting here now, the humiliation of the dinner still fresh, I saw it for what it was: fear. I was afraid of the confrontation, afraid of their reaction, afraid of shattering the fragile illusion of family I still clung to. But they had shattered it themselves. They had called me a disgrace and cast me out. They didn't want me, Florence, the daughter and sister. They wanted a ghost to fund their fantasies. With a deep breath, I opened my corporate banking portal. I located the automated monthly transfer I had scheduled for the 1st of next month. It was a substantial 6-figure sum, the injection that kept their world turning. I looked at the transaction details, at the numbers that represented sleepless nights, stressful negotiations, and the constant pressure of running my businesses. Then, with a single, decisive click, I hit cancel. I went back and canceled the one for the month after, and the month after that. I severed the financial lifeline. The silence in my apartment felt different now. It wasn't the silence of loneliness, but the silence of resolve. They had given me my marching orders. "You're on your own now." Fine, so were they just didn't know it yet. I wondered how long it would take for them to notice. A month, too. How long could Leo's genius keep them afloat on fumes? I closed the laptop. The game was over. I hadn't just packed my bags figuratively, I was about to do it for real. They wanted me gone. They were about to get their wish in a way they could never have imagined. The day after the disastrous birthday dinner, I woke up with a strange sense of calm. The decision was made. The umbilical cord of financial support was cut. Now, it was time to understand the true extent of the damage I had been blindly patching up for the past 5 years. I'd always known Leo and Isabel were careless with money, but I had intentionally avoided digging too deep. It was easier to just wire the funds and not think about the black hole they were pouring it into. Knowledge would have forced a confrontation I wasn't ready for. Now I was. My first call was to Clara. I told her everything: the dinner, the insults, the tough love, and my decision to finally stop the payments. There was a pause on the other end of the line, followed by a slow, deliberate, "Finally. I'm so proud of you, Flo. Now, what's your next move?" "Information," I said, my voice firm. "I need to know exactly what kind of mess they're in. I've been propping them up for so long, I have no idea what their real situation looks like." Clara, a practical and grounded school teacher, was the perfect sounding board. "So you're going to spy on your own family." "I'm not spying," I corrected her. "I'm conducting a risk assessment on an asset I'm no longer funding. They built their entire lives on a lie I helped create. I need to see the real foundation before it crumbles." My work had made me an expert in data analysis and pattern recognition. I had built systems that could track global supply chains and predict market fluctuations. Applying those skills to my family felt clinical and detached, a necessary procedure. I started with Isabel. Her life was an open book, curated for thousands of followers on social media. She was the picture of success, a glamorous wedding planner jet-setting to exotic locations, dining at Michelin-starred restaurants, and showcasing a wardrobe that cost more than my car. Her posts were a constant stream of hashtags: boss babe, luxury lifestyle, wedding guru. But I had access to more than just her public feed. A few years ago, after a security scare, I had installed advanced monitoring software on all my family's devices, under the guise of protecting them from hackers. It was an ethical gray area, but I justified it as protecting my investment. Now, it was my window into their reality. I started by cross-referencing her social media posts with her credit card statements from the trust account. The beautiful 5-star resort in Bali she'd posted from last month, the chargeback from the hotel for property damage, told a different story. The glowing review from a satisfied client she'd shared. A quick search revealed the client was a fake profile linked to one of Isabel's friends. Her thriving business was a facade. She was underbidding on jobs to secure high-profile clients, barely breaking even, and using the trust fund to cover the losses and maintain the illusion of a luxury lifestyle. She wasn't a boss babe. She was a girl playing dress-up with my money. The vendors she worked with were constantly complaining about late payments, a fact she conveniently omitted from her glossy online presence. Her entire identity was a carefully constructed lie, propped up by a bank account she thought was infinite. Then I turned to Leo. He was more careful, hiding his dealings behind the veneer of financial jargon and corporate respectability. He didn't flaunt his life on social media, but he did have a massive ego, which turned out to be just as revealing. I started with the stock portfolio he was so proud of managing. The mystery European stock that had been yielding such fantastic returns was, of course, the shell corporation I'd set up to funnel my money into the trust. Once I removed that from the equation, the picture was bleak. His actual investment strategy was catastrophic. He had lost millions on volatile tech startups and cryptocurrency schemes, chasing quick, dramatic wins instead of stable growth. The real bombshell came when I accessed his work emails. He was in deep with a loan shark. It wasn't for a small amount, it was a figure with 6 zeros. He'd been taking out high-interest loans to cover his investment losses, essentially robbing Peter to pay Paul, hoping for a miracle win that never came. He was using the monthly influx from my secret deposits to service the interest on these predatory loans. The new sports car he was buying wasn't a toy. It was part of the image, a desperate attempt to look successful to stave off suspicion. He wasn't the family's financial protector. He was a desperate gambler, one bad month away from total ruin. The sickness in my stomach was a mixture of anger and a strange, detached pity. They were living in a fantasy. My mother, Margaret, was the queen of this fantasy world. Her art gallery, her social status, her charity luncheons, all of it was funded by the illusion of the robust Hayes family fortune. I found invoices for gallery rentals, catering for parties, and extravagant art purchases that were all being paid for directly from the trust. She was as complicit as her children, happily spending the money without a single question about its origin. I spent the next 48 hours compiling the data, creating a detailed dossier of their financial lives. It was a tangled web of debt, deceit, and delusion. They weren't just spoiled, they were fundamentally incompetent, propped up by a safety net they had no idea existed. The tough love they wanted to give me was a projection of their own deep-seated fears. They saw my simple life not as a choice, but as the failure they secretly felt themselves to be. Their contempt for me was a shield against their own inadequacy. As I stared at the final report on my screen, a neat summary of impending financial doom, I felt no satisfaction, just a profound, aching sadness. I had wanted their respect, but I now saw that they were incapable of giving it. People who lived such fundamentally dishonest lives couldn't respect authenticity. They wouldn't even recognize it. Clara's words echoed again. Maybe it needs to fall. She was right. The house of cards was built on a rotten foundation, and the wind was starting to pick up. All I had to do now was step back and watch. Armed with the grim knowledge of my family's true financial state, my mission shifted. It was no longer enough to just cut them off. I needed to protect myself and my assets from the inevitable implosion. Leo's dealings with a loan shark were a massive red flag. Desperate people do desperate things, and I knew my name, Florence Hayes, was still legally tied to them. If things went bad, creditors, or worse, criminals could come looking for anyone with the Hayes surname. My anonymity was my greatest protection, but it was time to build legal firewalls. The first step was a visit to a man named Arthur Gable, a discreet corporate lawyer who specialized in asset protection for high-net-worth individuals. I had used his firm to set up my companies, and he knew me only as the enigmatic founder behind the Innovate bra. ND, he had never met me in person. Our dealings had always been through encrypted video calls and secure channels. I booked a face-to-face meeting. Walking into his polished, downtown office felt like stepping into a different world. Arthur was an older man, sharp and perceptive, and he didn't hide his surprise when a young woman in a simple dress and jacket walked in and introduced herself as his mysterious, multimillionaire client. "Ms. Hayes," he said, recovering quickly and shaking my hand. "This is an unexpected pleasure. I confess, I had pictured someone different." "People usually do," I said with a small smile. "That's been my advantage." I laid out the situation without emotion, presenting it as a business problem. I explained that I had been unknowingly subsidizing a failing family enterprise and had recently ceased all funding. I detailed Leo's disastrous financial management, Isabel's fraudulent business practices, and the presence of predatory lenders. I didn't mention they were my family. I referred to them as third-party associates with whom I shared a name and a compromised trust. Arthur listened intently, his expression growing more serious with each detail. When I finished, he leaned back in his chair. "This is a precarious situation, Ms. Hayes. Your instincts are correct. You need to insulate yourself immediately. The loan shark is the most significant threat. These individuals don't care about legal niceties. They will pursue any perceived source of funds." Over the next few days, we worked tirelessly. Arthur and his team were ruthlessly efficient. First, we legally changed my name. It was a drastic step, but a necessary one. Florence Hayes would cease to exist, at least on paper. I chose a new name, one with no connection to my past, Evelyn Reed. All my assets, my company ownership, my personal accounts, were seamlessly transferred to my new identity. It was a clean break, a legal rebirth. Next, we tackled the properties. My modest apartment was a rental, but my name was still on several family properties as a co-owner from my father's original will, including the sprawling mansion they lived in. It was a legal tie I needed to sever. Arthur drafted documents that relinquished my ownership, transferring my shares to a newly created blind trust controlled by his firm. This removed my name from the deeds, protecting me from any liens or seizures, but it also gave me a strategic advantage. I now had an anonymous, controlling interest in the very properties my family thought they owned outright. They wouldn't see it coming. The most complex part was addressing the trust fund. It was still legally in the Hayes name, and I needed to ensure no one could ever trace my past deposits back to me. My COO, Ben Carter, was the only other person in the world who knew about my double life. He was a tech genius and my most trusted friend. I tasked him with a digital cleanup. Ben was a ghost in the machine. He meticulously scrubbed the digital trail, erasing the links between my corporate accounts and the Hayes family trust. He rerouted the transaction histories through a labyrinth of international servers, making the origins of the money virtually untraceable. To any forensic accountant, it would now look like the funds had indeed come from a legitimate, albeit failed, overseas investment, just as Leo had claimed. Leo's lie was now his only reality. He would have to own his failure completely. During this period, I communicated with my family only through short, non-committal texts. My mother sent a few messages, her tone shifting from annoyed to vaguely concerned. "Florence, this silence is very immature. Your brother is worried." Worried about what? That his ATM had stopped working. Isabel sent a passive-aggressive text. "Hope you're figuring things out. Some of us have responsibilities." It was accompanied by a picture of her at a lavish charity event. I knew for a fact that the trust had just declined the payment for the table she was sitting at. The first cracks were appearing. The most chilling message came from an unknown number. It was just 2 words: "Call Leo." I knew instantly it was from the loan shark. They were getting impatient. Leo was clearly in over his head and was starting to give out my name as a potential backstop. This confirmed that changing my name and building the legal firewalls had been the right call. I blocked the number and forwarded it to Arthur's security team. Clara was my rock through all of it. She'd bring over pizza to my apartment, which was now filled with moving boxes, and we'd talk for hours. "Are you scared?" she asked me one night, looking at the piles of legal documents on my coffee table. I admitted. I was terrified of them hating me, of being truly alone, but they made it easy. They showed me I already was. What I feel now is clarity. I'm not destroying them, Clara. I'm just taking away the scaffolding that was holding up our and structure. It was going to fall eventually. I'm just making sure I'm not under it when it does. As the end of the month approached, I felt a sense of finality. My new identity was in place. My assets were secure. The digital trail was gone. I was Evelyn Reed, founder and CEO of Innovate. Florence Hayes was a ghost, a memory tied to a family that was about to wake up to a nightmare of their own making. I had unraveled their web of deceit, and in doing so, I had untangled myself from it for good. The silent exit was almost complete. The first of the month arrived with a quiet, anticlimactic dawn. For the first time in 5 years, the Hayes Family Trust did not receive its 6-figure injection of capital. Somewhere across town, in a mansion built on secrets, a financial time bomb had just started ticking. I imagined Leo logging into the account, his casual confidence slowly turning to confusion, then panic, as he refreshed the page over and over, seeing the balance remain stubbornly, terrifyingly low. My own day was the complete opposite. It was the beginning of my new life. The movers had already cleared out my apartment. All that was left was my terminal, a suitcase, and a box of personal keepsakes. My new apartment, under the name Evelyn Reed, was waiting for me. It was a beautiful penthouse downtown, with panoramic city views, a place I'd secretly bought months ago but had never allowed myself to live in. It was time to stop hiding. I sent a single, final text to my mother's phone. It was concise and offered no room for negotiation. As per Leo's advice, I am on my own now. I've moved to pursue a new opportunity and will be unreachable for the foreseeable future. I wish you all the best. I then powered down my old phone for the last time and dropped it into an electronics recycling bin. That part of my life was over. The silence was now absolute. My business partner, Ben, met me at the new apartment. He handed me a new phone with a new number and a set of keys. "Welcome home, Evelyn," he said with a warm smile. "The servers are migrated. The firewalls are holding. Florence Hayes is officially a ghost." "Thank you, Ben," I said, feeling a wave of gratitude for his loyalty. "For everything." "You built this empire, Evelyn," he corrected himself. "You deserve to enjoy it without being someone's personal piggy bank. Now, what's the strategic play?" "The strategy is silence," I replied, looking out the floor-to-ceiling windows at the sprawling city below. "We do nothing, we wait." Their entire infrastructure, Leo's debts, Isabel's business, my mother's gallery, it was all balanced on that monthly payment. Without it, the whole thing is insolvent. It will collapse under its own weight. I just want to see how long it takes. The first few weeks were a strange mix of liberation and anxiety. I threw myself into my work, now operating from a state-of-the-art home office instead of a cramped spare bedroom. I held board meetings via video conference, signed contracts that would change the trajectory of my industry, and for the first time, I used my real voice. the voice of a CEO, not the quiet, apologetic whisper of Florence Hayes. Meanwhile, Ben set up a passive monitoring system for me. It aggregated news, social media mentions, and public records connected to the Hayes family. It was like watching a slow-motion car crash from a great distance. The first sign of trouble appeared about 10 days in. A local society blog posted a short, catty piece about my mother's art gallery suddenly canceling its upcoming gala. The official reason was venue issues, but the blog hinted at financial troubles. A week later, Isabel's social media went quiet. Her daily posts of luxury and glamour were replaced by an eerie silence. Ben's system picked up chatter on a private forum for event planners. Several vendors were complaining loudly that Isabel Hayes had bounced checks and was not returning their calls. The alerts on Leo were the most alarming. A series of automated payments from the trust account began to default: the lease on his sports car, the mortgage on his high-rise condo, and several large credit card bills. Then came the public record alert. A lien was placed against the Hayes family mansion. One of Leo's creditors had gotten tired of waiting. The wolves were at the door. Clara called me, her voice laced with concern. "Flo, are you seeing this? It's happening faster than I thought." Their overhead was massive, and their lifestyle was built on immediate gratification, I explained, watching the data scroll across my screen. They had no reserves. They were living transfer to transfer. They probably thought the missing payment was a bank error. They would have spent the first week or two waiting for it to fix itself. The most telling piece of information came from a snippet of a conversation Ben's system flagged from a hacked phone call record. Leo speaking to Isabel. His voice was F. Rantic, hers was shrill. "I don't know what happened," Leo was saying. "The European account just dried up, it's gone." "What do you mean, gone?" Isabel shrieked. "I have deposits due for the Atherton wedding. They'll sue me, they'll ruin me." "Try calling Florence again." "I have, her phone is disconnected. She's vanished. It's her, I know she did something." It was the first time they had considered that I might have had any power in the situation. But even then, they couldn't grasp the scale of it. They probably imagined I had somehow blocked the account out of spite. They still had no concept that I was the source. Their arrogance was its own kind of blindness. The final piece of my plan was subtle. The blind trust that now held my share of the family properties was controlled by Arthur Gable's firm. He was instructed to remain a silent partner until the creditors made their move. When the lien was placed on the mansion, other creditors saw blood in the water and started filing their own claims. The total debt Leo had racked up was staggering, far more than the value of the home. Foreclosure was no longer a risk, it was an inevitability. Arthur's firm, as a primary stakeholder, received a notification of the impending foreclosure auction. The family legacy, the grand mansion that was the symbol of their status, was going to be sold off on the courthouse steps to the highest bidder. And I, Evelyn Reed, was going to be that bidder. I wasn't going to save it for them. I was going to buy it out from under them, and they would never even know who held the deed. The silence had done its work. Now it was time for the final, public confrontation. The day of the auction was gray and overcast, a perfect mirror of the Hayes family's fortunes. I didn't attend in person, of course. Evelyn Reed had no reason to be at a foreclosure auction for some disgraced family's estate. Instead, I sat in my penthouse office, watching a live video feed provided by one of Arthur Gable's associates who was there to bid on my behalf. On a second monitor, I had the real-time feed from the security cameras I'd had installed at the mansion years ago. I wanted to see their faces when the news hit. The weeks leading up to this day had been a cascade of failures for my family. My mother's gallery had closed for good, its expensive, unsold art now property of the bank. Isabel's wedding planning business was in ruins, buried under a mountain of lawsuits from angry clients and unpaid vendors. Her social media had been reactivated, but only to post a tearful, rambling apology video that was widely mocked. Leo was nowhere to be seen. Rumor had it he was hiding, terrified of the loan shark he could no longer pay. They had lost everything they had built their identities around, their status, their businesses, their reputation. All that was left was the house. On my screen, I watched them huddled together in the grand living room of the mansion. The room, usually so pristine and perfect, was in disarray. Boxes were half-packed, furniture was draped in dust cloths. They looked small, defeated. Leo was pacing back and forth, his face pale and drawn. Isabel was curled up on a sofa, staring blankly at a wall. My mother was sitting perfectly still, her hands clasped in her lap, a picture of shattered pride. They were waiting for a miracle, hoping that some last-minute legal maneuver from their overwhelmed lawyer might save them. The auction began. Arthur's man, a stoic professional named Mr. Harris, stood calmly in the small crowd of property developers and bargain hunters. The bidding started low. A few developers made offers, seeing the value in the land. But each time, Mr. Harris would counter with a calm, decisive bid, pushing the price just high enough to scare off the competition. He was acting on my instructions, delivered via a secure text channel. Back in the mansion, Leo's phone buzzed. He looked at it, and I saw his shoulders slump. He spoke to my mother, and she covered her face with her hands. The auction was proceeding. Their last hope was gone. The bidding war was short. The developers quickly realized they were up against someone with very deep pockets and no intention of backing down. The final price was well over market value, a number I was more than happy to pay. It was, after all, my own money coming back to me in the form of their most prized asset. Sold, the auctioneer's voice crackled through my speakers, to the representative of the Blackwood Trust. Blackwood Trust, a name Arthur had created, anonymous, untraceable, powerful. I watched my family's reactions. There was no dramatic outburst, just a heavy, crushing silence. Leo sank into a chair, looking utterly broken. Isabel started to cry, not the performative sobs from her apology video, but ugly, ragged gasps of true despair. It was the sound of reality finally crashing through her carefully constructed fantasy. This wasn't a moment of triumphant glee for me. I didn't pump my fist in the air or smile. I just watched, feeling a cold, quiet sense of finality. This was the consequence they had earned. This was the outcome of years of arrogance, cruelty, and willful blindness. The next phase of the plan began an hour later. A courier delivered a legal notice to the mansion. I watched on the camera as my mother opened it, her hands trembling. It was an eviction notice. The new owner, the Blackwood Trust, required them to vacate the property within 72 hours. Attached to the notice was a cashier's check. It was for a modest amount, enough for a few months' rent on a small apartment and a security deposit. It was a final, clinical gesture. I wouldn't let them be homeless, but I would not let them be comfortable. It was more grace than they had ever shown me. Then came the confrontation I had been waiting for. My old phone, the one I had kept in a drawer, was connected to a charger and powered on. As I had anticipated, it was flooded with hundreds of missed calls and frantic text messages. I ignored them all and made a single call to my mother's number. She answered on the first ring. "Florence," her voice was a bare whisper, filled with a desperate hope. "Hello, Mother," I said. My voice was calm, even the voice of Evelyn Reed. "Florence, thank God. Where are you? We've been so worried. Something terrible has happened. They sold the house. We have nowhere to go." "I know," I said simply. There was a pause. What do you mean you know?" "I know because I'm the one who bought it," I stated, with no malice, just fact. The silence on the other end of the line was profound. I could hear her sharp intake of breath. I could hear Leo and Isabel in the background asking who she was talking to. "You," she stammered. "But how? You don't have any money. Leo said you were cut off. You're broke." "That's the funny thing about assumptions, Mother," I said, my voice turning colder. "You assumed I was a failure because I didn't fit your definition of success. You called me a disgrace. You told me I was on my own. You never once stopped to ask me about my life. You never cared." I could hear her passing the phone to Leo. His voice came on the line, shaking with a rage that couldn't mask his fear. "What did you do, Florence? What kind of game are you playing?" "It's not a game, Leo," I replied. "It's a balance sheet. For the last 5 years, the mystery European investment that made you look like a genius was me. The money you were gambling away, the funds Isabel was using to build her fake career, the cash mom was burning on her gallery, it was all mine. I was the trust fund. And on my birthday, you told me I was cut off, so I cut you off. This is the result. The phone went dead. I imagine he dropped it. I didn't need to hear any more. I had said my piece. I had shown them the truth not with rage or tears, but with cold, hard facts. They hadn't been brought down by some external force. They had been brought down by their own actions, the consequences of which had simply been delayed by my misguided generosity. The confrontation was over. And it had happened exactly as I'd planned, on my terms, from a position of unassailable strength. In the aftermath of the auction and the phone call, a quiet settled over my life. The constant stream of alerts from my monitoring system on the Hayes family dwindled to a trickle. They had well and truly hit rock bottom, and there was nothing left for the creditors or gossip blogs to report. They moved into a small, cramped apartment in a less than desirable part of the city, funded by the cashier's check I had sent them. The great Hayes family, who once looked down on my modest apartment, were now living in a place that made mine look like a palace. Clara came over to my new penthouse a few weeks later. She brought a bottle of champagne. "To Evelyn Reed," she toasted, her eyes sparkling, "and to the end of a very long, very exhausting chapter." We sat on the balcony, looking out at the glittering city lights. "Have you heard from them?" she asked gently. "Not a word," I replied, sipping the champagne. "And I don't expect to. Their pride won't allow it. In their minds, I'm the villain who destroyed them, not the fool who enabled them for 5 years." "Do you feel guilty?" I considered the question for a long moment. "I feel sad for the family I wish I had," I admitted. "But I don't feel guilty for my actions. I gave them every opportunity to be decent, to show me a shred of respect for who I was, not what I had. They failed every single time. This wasn't revenge, Clara. It was a course correction." The Hayes mansion, my childhood home, sat empty for a while. I had no desire to live in it. It held too many ghosts. Instead, I did something my family would never have conceived of. I partnered with a non-profit organization that provided housing and resources for underprivileged young women. Pursuing careers in technology. Arthur Gable, on behalf of the anonymous Blackwood Trust, donated the mansion to them. It was to be converted into the Innovate House, a residence and incubator for bright minds who had the talent but not the resources. The legacy of that house would no longer be about empty status. It would be about creating real opportunity. The irony was not lost on me. A place built on judging and excluding people was now a sanctuary for those who needed a hand up. My own life under my new name flourished. Freed from the weight of my family's judgment and the financial burden of their lifestyle, I poured all my energy into my companies. We launched a new software suite that revolutionized the renewable energy sector. I started a mentorship program. I traveled not for show, but for experience. I was no longer hiding. Evelyn Reed was confident, respected, and happy. She was the person Florence Hayes had always been on the inside. About a year later, I saw him. I was leaving a business lunch downtown when I spotted Leo. He was working as a valet, hustling to open the door of a luxury car for a wealthy-looking couple. He was thinner, and the arrogant swagger was gone, replaced by a weary subservience. Our eyes met for a fleeting second. There was a flicker of recognition in his, followed by a wave of shame and confusion. He looked away quickly, pretending he hadn't seen me. He saw a well-dressed, confident woman, and he probably wondered where he knew me from. He didn't see his sister. He didn't see the broke disgrace. He had once offered a job at a call center. I just got into my car and drove away. There was nothing left to say. I never learned what happened to Isabel or my mother in detail. The last I heard, Isabel was working in retail and my mother had become a recluse. They had been given a harsh but necessary lesson in value. They had valued things, money, status, image. They never learned to value people, and in the end, they lost all of it. My new beginning was built on the ashes of my old life. The lesson I learned was a painful one. Sometimes the people you are most loyal to are the ones holding you back the most. Cutting them off wasn't an act of cruelty, it was an act of survival. I had to let their world collapse to finally build my own. And as I looked out from my office at the city that was now mine to conquer, I felt no anger, no bitterness, just peace. I was finally on my own, just as they had demanded. And I had never been better.